When my sister-in-law called me a freeloader in front of the entire family, I said nothing and let her believe it. 11 years later, she showed up to a very fancy anniversary dinner and threw a legal contract into my food. She thought she would ruin my husband and me. But her smug smile vanished the moment I read page 4 and exposed the catastrophic mistake that would cost her everything. My name is Stella, and I am 33 years old. I am sitting in an upscale Boston seafood restaurant trying to wipe lobster risotto off a manila folder. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a toxic relative who underestimated your worth. Trust me, you want to hear how I wiped that arrogant smirk off her face. The evening was supposed to be a beautiful celebration for my in-laws Richard and Diane's ruby anniversary. We were dining at an exclusive waterfront restaurant. My husband Liam sat quietly beside me. Across from us sat his older brother Carter, the golden child, and his wife Jasmine. Jasmine is a corporate lawyer, a brilliant African-American woman who never misses an opportunity to remind everyone of her billing rate. Tonight she was dripping in diamonds and disdain. We barely finished our main courses when Jasmine reached into her tote bag, pulled out the thick folder, and slid it aggressively across the tablecloth. It landed squarely in my plate of creamy risotto. The sauce splattered onto my blouse, but nobody blinked. Richard and Diane just watched with approving smiles. "Sign it, Liam." Jasmine demanded, her voice carrying over the dining room. "It is a standard buyout agreement. You are surrendering your 30% inherited stake in your late grandfather's estate to Carter. We are giving you $10,000 for it. Be grateful." Liam stared at the sauce-covered folder, his face flushing red. "10,000, he whispered. "The estate is worth at least $500,000. Jasmine let out a mocking laugh. "Please," she sneered, glaring directly at me. "We all know you two are drowning on your pathetic high school history teacher salary, because Stella has not worked a single day in 11 years. She sits at home in cheap sweatpants doing absolutely nothing while you break your back. Take the 10 grand, Liam, pay off your credit cards, and buy your freeloader wife a real job." The table fell silent. Diane took a sip of wine, enjoying the show. Carter puffed out his chest. They expected me to cry. They expected Liam to fold and sign the papers in shame. For 11 years, I played the part of the quiet, unemployed wife. I let them believe I was financially dependent and completely clueless. I did not cry. I calmly picked up a napkin, wiped the lobster sauce off the folder, and opened it. "What are you doing?" Jasmine snapped. "That is legal terminology. You would not understand a word of it." I ignored her and flipped to the 4th page. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs. For a hotshot corporate lawyer, Jasmine had been incredibly sloppy. I took a sip of my water and looked up, meeting Jasmine's furious glare with a warm smile. "This is a very interesting contract, Jasmine," I said, my voice perfectly pleasant. "But you might want to review Section 4, Paragraph B." Jasmine scoffed, crossing her arms. "There is nothing wrong with Section 4. I drafted it myself." "I know you did," I replied. "That is the problem. You used a reciprocal indemnity template, but you forgot to strike out the liability transfer. If Liam signs this document right now, he surrenders his 30% stake. However, this clause legally binds Carter's tech startup to absorb any undisclosed debts attached to the estate. Since the estate currently has a pending environmental lien of over $200,000, you are essentially tricking your own husband into bankrupting his company to buy a toxic asset." The blood instantly drained from Jasmine's face. Carter sharply turned to his wife, his eyes wide with panic. "Let me see that," he demanded, snatching the stained contract from my hands. Jasmine scrambled out of her chair, grasping at the papers, as she realized what she had done. I sat back in my chair, watching the brilliant lawyer scramble to explain her catastrophic drafting error in front of her golden child husband and horrified in-laws. Jasmine looked up, her eyes locking onto mine. The smugness was completely gone, replaced by pure hatred. She tried to publicly humiliate the family freeloader, but instead, I just made her look like a complete and total amateur. The silence at the table was deafening. Jasmine snatched the contract from Carter's hands, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as she shoved it back into her designer tote bag. She could not look at me. Instead, she locked her eyes on the waiter who was walking past our table. "Excuse me," Jasmine snapped, snapping her fingers in the air. "We are done here. Bring the check immediately. And make sure you hand it directly to my husband. We are treating everyone tonight." She turned her attention back to Liam and me, her lips curling into a vicious, arrogant smile. "We want to show the freeloaders how real adults live." Richard and Diane nodded approvingly. Diane reached over and patted Jasmine's arm. "That is so generous of you both," she cooed sweetly. "Carter always takes such excellent care of his family. It is nice to see some of us acting like responsible adults." I felt Liam tense beside me. He opened his mouth to defend us, but I placed a gentle hand on his knee, silently telling him to let it go. I knew exactly what Jasmine was doing. She needed to reassert her dominance. She needed to prove that even if she made a legal mistake, she was still the wealthy, successful sister-in-law, and I was still the broke, pathetic wife. The waiter returned, carrying a sleek leather folder. He placed it directly in front of Carter. I caught a quick glimpse of the receipt. The total was exactly $3,500. Carter puffed out his chest, proudly reached into his tailored suit jacket, and pulled out a heavy platinum credit card. He dropped it onto the silver tray with a loud clack, making absolutely sure everyone saw the shiny metallic sheen. "Keep the change," Carter said loudly, though the tip was not even included yet. The waiter gave a polite nod and walked away. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, swirling the last bit of expensive wine in her crystal glass. "You know, Liam," she said sweetly, "if you and Stella are struggling that much, I could probably find her a job in the mailroom at my firm. It pays minimum wage, but it is better than sitting around the house all day waiting for a handout. The firm even provides free coffee." Liam glared at her. "Stella does not need a job in your mailroom, Jasmine. She manages our household perfectly, and she does a lot of freelance work." Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Right, freelance work. What does that even mean? Selling knitted sweaters on the internet?" Before Liam could respond, the waiter reappeared. He looked extremely uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered something quietly to Carter. Carter's face instantly dropped. "What do you mean it was declined?" Carter demanded, his voice suddenly loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Try it again. The machine must be broken." The waiter shook his head politely. "I apologize, sir, but I ran it 3 times. The bank is denying the transaction." The smug expression completely vanished from Jasmine's face. She scrambled to open her designer bag. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, pulling out her own gold card. "Just use mine. It is a joint account anyway." The waiter took the card and scurried away, only to return 2 minutes later looking even more apologetic. "I am so sorry, ma'am. This card is also being declined." The table erupted into chaotic whispers. Jasmine was furiously checking her banking app on her phone, while Carter aggressively tapped his fingers against the mahogany table. Diane quickly tried to run damage control. "Oh, it is just that silly bank fraud protection," she announced loudly to anyone who might be listening. "They always freeze our accounts when we spend too much at nice restaurants. It happens to wealthy people all the time." "Right, Richard." Her husband nodded frantically, though his face was red with deep embarrassment. While they were busy making pathetic excuses, I quietly reached into my small clutch. I pulled out my sleek, unbranded black card. There was no bank logo, no limit, and no name printed on the front. It was an exclusive corporate account tied directly to the billion-dollar holding company I secretly founded. I caught the waiter's eye as he stood awkwardly nearby. I held out the card. He took it, discreetly swiped it on his handheld terminal, and handed it right back to me, along with the approved receipt. Jasmine stared at the receipt. "Whose money is that?" she demanded. I smiled softly. "Do not worry, it is paid." We left them in stunned silence. By morning, our family group chat exploded. Jasmine sent an essay accusing me of draining Liam's retirement account to show off at dinner last night. Before Liam could even type a response to the absurd group chat messages, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed from our front door. Liam and I exchanged a confused look across the kitchen island. It was barely 8 in the morning on a Saturday. I set down my coffee mug and followed him to the entryway. When Liam pulled the door open, Carter and Jasmine pushed their way inside without waiting for an invitation. Jasmine was dressed in a sharp designer pantsuit, clutching a leather briefcase like it was a weapon. Carter stood slightly behind her wearing a smug grin and a tailored blazer that cost more than our monthly mortgage. "What are you two doing here?" Liam asked, his voice thick with frustration. "We are here for an intervention," Jasmine declared. She marched into our small living room, her expensive heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. She looked around at our modest furniture with naked disgust before turning her piercing glare on me. "You have completely lost your mind, Stella. Taking advantage of Liam is one thing, but completely draining his life savings to play pretend rich girl at a restaurant is a criminal offense." Liam sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Jasmine, nobody drained my savings. Stella paid for dinner. End of story. Now get out of our house." Jasmine ignored him entirely. She unlatched her briefcase and pulled out a stack of pristine white papers. "I am stepping in as your legal counsel, Liam, whether you want to admit you need help or not. What Stella did last night constitutes financial abuse. I have already drafted the preliminary paperwork for a restraining order regarding your joint accounts. If you do not sign these documents giving Carter and me power of attorney over your finances, I will personally sue Stella for fraud and see her locked up." I laughed. "You want to sue me for paying a restaurant bill?" I asked, amused by her theatrical performance. "What exactly is your legal argument, Jasmine? That I bought too much crab?" Carter stepped forward, puffing out his chest to tower over Liam. "This is not a joke, Stella. We know you are bleeding my brother dry. You sit around here all day doing nothing while he works himself to the bone. But your little free ride is officially over. Things are about to change for our family." Carter straightened his blazer, his smug grin widening. "In exactly 3 weeks, my tech startup is being acquired. We are finalizing a $60 million buyout with a ruthless, top-tier private equity firm out of Silicon Valley. They do not play games, and neither do I. Once that money hits my account, I will be wealthier than you can comprehend. The first thing I will do with my fortune is hire the most expensive divorce lawyers in the state to free my brother from you." Jasmine smiled triumphantly, slipping the papers back into her briefcase. "You heard him. You are out of time, Stella. You can either pack your bags and leave quietly, or you can wait for my legal team to tear you apart. Enjoy your weekend." With that dramatic exit, Jasmine turned on her heel and marched out the front door, Carter following closely behind her. Liam slammed the door shut and let out a long, exhausted breath. He turned to me, his eyes full of apology. "I am so sorry, Stella. They are completely delusional. I will call my parents and put an end to this." I smiled softly and reached out to squeeze his hand. "Do not worry about it, Liam. I have a feeling Carter's big buyout might hit a little snag. Go take a shower. I'm going to get some work done." Liam kissed my forehead and headed upstairs. Once I heard the shower running, I walked back to the kitchen island and pulled out my heavily encrypted laptop. I typed in my passcode, bypassed the biometric security, and logged into the secure server. I opened the pending acquisitions folder for my firm. I scrolled down the list of upcoming buyouts until I found it. Carter's Tech Startup. The buyer was Apex Vanguard, my private equity firm. I read through the preliminary financial reports his team had submitted. Carter thought he was dealing with some faceless Silicon Valley billionaires. He had no idea the ruthless CEO he was so eager to impress was the same woman he just threatened in her own living room. I smiled, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I opened a direct encrypted chat with my proxy, the chief operations officer, who handled my public-facing duties. I typed a single decisive command. Halt the acquisition. Initiate a deep dive forensic audit into Carter's accounting. I hit send and closed the laptop. 2 weeks later, the tension in the family had supposedly blown over, replaced by the frantic preparations for Richard and Diane's annual Labor Day party. This was not a casual backyard barbecue. It was a catered high-society networking event designed specifically to showcase Carter's impending $60 million acquisition. The driveway was packed with luxury vehicles by the time Liam and I arrived. We had barely stepped foot inside the grand foyer when Jasmine intercepted us. She was wearing a custom silk dress holding a clipboard like a weapon. "You are here," Jasmine said, barely glancing at Liam before shoving the clipboard into my hands. "The catering staff is short-handed, and Carter has some important Silicon Valley investors arriving at any minute. I need you to manage the coat check in the front room and make sure trays of champagne are constantly circulating the patio. Try not to spill anything on the guests, Stella." Liam stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Stella is not your maid, Jasmine. She is a guest. We are going to the patio to get a drink." I placed a gentle, reassuring hand on Liam's chest, stopping him. "It is fine," I said smoothly. "I do not mind helping out." Jasmine smirked at us, clearly thrilled that I finally knew my place. "Good. Get to work then." I spent the next 2 hours quietly hanging up expensive coats and carrying a silver tray of champagne glasses through the crowded patio. I actually preferred the mindless task. It allowed me to blend into the background and listen. People tend to ignore the service staff, which meant I heard everything. I walked toward the outdoor bar, stopping just behind a small circle of guests gathered around Diane. She was wearing a ridiculously expensive oversized sun hat, holding court with 2 wives of prominent local politicians. "Oh, Carter is just brilliant," Diane boasted loudly, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear her. "We always knew he was destined for greatness. That is why Richard and I did not hesitate to remortgage this house to pay for his tuition at Yale. When you have a golden goose, you invest in it." One of the wives took a slow sip of her cold cocktail. "That is quite a risk, Diane. Did you do the same for Liam?" Diane laughed a sharp, dismissive sound. "Goodness, no. Liam is a sweet boy, but he just does not have his brother's drive. We told Liam he had to figure out his own state college tuition. He took out student loans, of course. It builds character for people like him. You cannot waste Ivy League money on a future high school history teacher." I tightened my grip on the silver tray. Liam was standing only a few feet away, pretending to examine a potted plant, but I saw the slight slump in his shoulders. He had heard every word. His own parents had risked their home, their financial security, to hand Carter the world on a silver platter while forcing Liam into a decade of crippling debt. It made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral, grabbed a fresh bottle of champagne, and continued my rounds. The evening was in full swing when a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the valet stand. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the doors opened. Stepping out was Harrison Vance, an older, highly respected tech billionaire who practically owned half of the real estate in Palo Alto. His presence at a suburban party was a big deal. Carter nearly dropped his drink when he saw him. Jasmine gasped, immediately smoothing her silk dress and rushing toward the entrance with her hand outstretched, ready to deliver her most charming corporate lawyer introduction. "Mr. Vance," she beamed, practically sprinting across the marble floor. "It is such an honor to welcome you to our home. I am Jasmine Carter's wife." Harrison Vance did not even slow down. He walked right past Jasmine without a second glance, leaving her hand hovering awkwardly in the empty air. He navigated through the sea of wealthy guests, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. I was standing near the patio doors, still wearing my plain black dress, holding a tray with 2 half-empty glasses. The crowd parted instinctively as the billionaire approached me. Jasmine spun around her face, twisting in utter confusion as she watched him stop squarely in front of the family freeloader. Harrison Vance buttoned his suit jacket, stood up straight, and bowed his head slightly in a gesture of respect. "A pleasure to see you, Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the sudden silence of the room. Behind him, Jasmine dropped her crystal glass. It shattered loudly against the marble floor. The shattering glass broke the spell. Everyone stared at Harrison Vance, then at me. I offered the billionaire a polite smile and a subtle nod, letting him know not to say anything else. He understood instantly. Carter recovered first. He let out a loud laugh that echoed across the patio. He rushed forward aggressively, clapping the older man on the shoulder. "Mr. Vance, it is so good to see you." Carter projected his voice. "I see you have met my brother's wife, Stella. She is not a chairwoman of anything, just a stay-at-home wife. We were just talking about how her memory is failing." Carter leaned in, whispering loudly for the wealthy guest to catch. "Early-stage dementia," Carter mouthed to the crowd, tapping his temple with a sympathetic grimace. "It is a tragedy. He gets confused easily these days." The tension instantly evaporated into relieved chuckles. Diane quickly swooped in, guiding Mr. Vance to the bar. Jasmine recovered her composure, snapping her fingers at a maid to sweep up the glass. She shot me a venomous look. "Nice try, Stella," Jasmine hissed under her breath. "Nobody is buying whatever bizarre delusion you are selling. Now get back to the coat room before you embarrass yourself further." The family eagerly returned to their mocking, convinced that a brilliant mind in tech was simply losing his marbles. I did not argue. I slowly walked back to my coat station, a quiet smile playing perfectly on my lips, while Carter was busy schmoozing investors with arrogant lies. The trap I had set earlier that week finally snapped shut. My encrypted proxy at Apex Vanguard officially launched the deep dive forensic audit into his tech startup. Within hours, my elite accounting team uncovered a massive web of fabricated revenue reports, hidden offshore liabilities, and inflated user metrics. Carter had not just stretched the truth. He had committed textbook corporate fraud. By 5 o'clock that evening, the devastating audit findings triggered an automated alert to Carter's primary lenders. When massive banks smell a rat, they aggressively pull their money back. I stood quietly near the buffet table, watching Carter check his phone. His confident posture suddenly faltered. He stared at the glowing screen, his face turning an unnatural shade of gray. He frantically tapped the glass screen, dialing a number, and pressing the phone hard against his ear. I watched him pace rapidly away from the crowd, seeking refuge behind a large oak tree at the edge of the lawn. His elite investors, who had just received the exact same panicked industry alerts, were suddenly checking their watches and making hasty excuses to leave the party. The $60 million acquisition was completely dead in the water, and the financial fallout was instantaneous. A major corporate bank had just issued an immediate $4 million margin call on Carter's business loans. If he could not prove absolute liquidity, they would seize everything. And since Carter had personally guaranteed those loans, his personal assets were next on the chopping block. The party was thinning out. The remaining wealthy guests sensed the disastrous shift and vanished, leaving only confused family members scattered around the patio. Suddenly, a choked sob echoed from the edge of the lawn. Everyone turned in shock. Carter stumbled out from behind the oak tree, his expensive suit jacket discarded in the dirt, his silk tie pulled loose. He collapsed onto a patio chair, burying his face in his hands. Diane rushed to his side. "Carter, sweetheart, what is wrong?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. Carter looked up, tears streaming down his face, shattering his golden child facade forever. "The buyout is gone." He choked out, his voice cracking. "They found the altered ledgers. The bank just called my loans. I owe $4 million immediately." The patio fell into a stunned, horrifying silence. Jasmine stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, as her luxurious lifestyle evaporated. "But it gets much worse." Carter sobbed loudly, aggressively clutching his mother's hands for support. "The feds are going to look at the books. If I do not get $1 million in cash by Friday to cover the immediate shortfall and stop the bank from auditing the parent company, I am going to federal prison for wire fraud." Diane gasped loudly, clutching her chest. Richard staggered backward, grabbing a chair just to stay standing. Jasmine's shock quickly morphed into cold survival instinct. She turned her sharp gaze directly onto Richard and Diane. "You have to save him," Jasmine demanded, her voice completely devoid of any warmth. "Sell this house. You have a ton of equity. List it tomorrow for a fast cash closing. Do it, or your perfect son is going to spend the next 10 years in a concrete cell. Diane shook her head frantically, her hands trembling as she grabbed Jasmine's arm. We cannot sell the house by Friday, Jasmine. Real estate transactions take weeks, sometimes months. There are inspections, appraisals, closing periods. There is absolutely no way we can get that kind of cash in 4 days. Carter is going to go to jail. Richard turned his desperate, bloodshot eyes toward Liam. He crossed the patio and grabbed Liam by the shoulders. Liam, listen to me. You have perfect credit. You have a steady government paycheck as a teacher. The bank will trust you. There are hard money lenders who can front us the cash by Wednesday. If you and Stella sign a bridge loan with us, we can save your brother. Liam stepped back, physically pulling himself out of his father's grip. He looked at Richard with absolute disgust. Are you out of your mind? You want me to co-sign a $4 million predatory loan to cover Carter's corporate fraud? If he defaults, and he will, I will be legally responsible for millions. They will garnish my wages. They will take everything I have ever worked for. Diane rushed forward, her face contorted with angry desperation. He is your own brother. Family makes sacrifices for each other. You have nothing to lose anyway, Liam. You just rent that tiny suburban house. You drive a 10-year-old car. Carter is building an empire. He is the future of this family. You owe him this. Liam's voice was remarkably steady, though I could see his fists clenching at his sides. I owe him nothing. You remortgaged this house to pay for his Ivy League education while I drowned in student debt. You pampered him while you ignored me. And now you want me to ruin my life and my wife's life to save a criminal? The answer is no. Diane's face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at Liam's chest. Then you are no longer my son. Get off my property. You are completely dead to me. I stepped forward, moving cleanly between my husband and his furious mother. I cleared my throat, forcing the entire panicked group to look at me. My voice was calm and even, cutting through the thick humidity of the summer night. Actually, Diane, there is another option. One that does not involve ruining my husband's credit or waiting for a traditional buyer. Everyone stared at me. I looked directly at Carter, then at Richard. I will buy this house from you, right now, in cash. The market value for this property is exactly $1.5 million. That is more than enough to cover your immediate bank shortfall and keep the federal investigators off your back while you liquidate whatever remaining assets you have left. Diane blinked, completely stunned. Richard let out a confused breath. But before they could speak, I raised my hand. There is one non-negotiable condition. The house will be deeded entirely to me. Not to Liam, not to Carter, exclusively to Stella. You will sign the title over to me tonight completely, as is waiving all inspection contingencies. Jasmine threw her head back and let out a shrill, hysterical laugh that echoed across the empty patio. Oh my God, you are completely psychotic. You do not have $1.5 million. You barely have enough money to buy cheap groceries. You were just hanging up coats for tips an hour ago. You are trying to scam a family in the middle of a major crisis. You are completely delusional. I smiled warmly at her. If I am so delusional, Jasmine, call my bluff. You are a brilliant corporate lawyer, are you not? Go into the study, boot up your laptop, and draft the property transfer agreement and a legally binding bill of sale. Do it right now. Write it tight. Make it ironclad. Jasmine's eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. Gladly. I am going to draw up the strictest contract you have ever seen. And when your imaginary bank account declines the transfer, I am going to have the police arrest you for fraud. 20 minutes later, we were all gathered around the heavy mahogany desk in Richard's study. Jasmine slammed the freshly printed legal documents onto the leather blotter. Sign it, she hissed, slamming a pen down next to the paper. Show us the money, you pathetic liar. Richard and Diane signed the seller sections with shaking hands, desperate for any lifeline. I calmly picked up the pen and signed my name on the buyer line. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened my secure, encrypted banking portal. I typed in the routing number Jasmine had provided for Carter's emergency business account. Amount $1,500,000. I pressed the transfer button. Now check your account, I said quietly. Carter snatched his phone off the desk, his thumb frantically refreshing his banking application. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the study as the loading icon spun. Then Carter dropped his phone onto the desk as if it had burned his hand. His mouth hung open. The screen glowed brightly, showing an immediate cleared wire transfer of $1.5 million. Jasmine lunged forward to look at the screen, her breath hitching violently in her throat as she counted the zeros. The title cleared instantly. I watched the blood drain from their faces as they realized the terrifying truth. Stella was not a freeloader. Stella was the new owner of their home. Despite the indisputable wire transfer bearing my name, the family simply refused to accept reality. The human ego will perform incredible mental gymnastics to protect itself from humiliation. By the following Tuesday, a completely new absurd narrative had taken hold of my in-laws. Diane called Liam while he was on his lunch break at the high school. Her voice was dripping with forced sweetness as she cheerfully announced that she had finally figured out the truth. She told Liam that he must have secretly won the state lottery or inherited a hidden trust fund from a distant relative, and that I was simply a manipulative wife controlling his newfound wealth. Diane had the audacity to suggest Liam hire an aggressive divorce lawyer to seize control of his money from his gold-digging wife. Liam was so utterly disgusted that he hung up the phone without saying a single word, but Jasmine took the family delusion dangerously further. As a corporate lawyer whose identity was built on feeling superior, she could not stomach the idea that the woman she had ruthlessly mocked for 11 years now held the deed to the family estate. To Jasmine, I was still the unemployed freeloader in cheap sweatpants. She convinced herself that if I had $1.5 million in liquid cash, the money had to be dirty. It had to be the result of an elaborate financial scam. She reasoned that if she could prove I obtained the money illegally, she could invalidate the real estate contract, reverse the sale, and legally seize the property to cover Carter's remaining debts. She refused to lose to someone she viewed as completely beneath her. Jasmine's blinding arrogance destroyed her professional judgment. Working at a prestigious, high-powered law firm gave her access to highly sensitive, restricted investigative databases. These expensive legal tools are strictly monitored and legally bound to be used only for vetting official corporate clients and conducting authorized due diligence. Using them for personal vendettas is a massive violation of federal privacy laws and basic legal ethics. But Jasmine believed she was untouchable. Late on a Thursday night, sitting alone in her luxury glass corner office, she intentionally bypassed her firm's strict compliance protocols. She entered my full legal name and ran a comprehensive, unauthorized background check on my private Social Security number. She illegally pulled my credit history, my personal tax records, and attempted to access my banking affiliations. She was desperately hunting for a fatal mistake. She was looking for a fake shell company, a shady offshore account, or any tiny discrepancy she could drag before a judge to tear up my property deed. What Jasmine failed to realize was that when you operate at the highest levels of global private equity, your personal data is not just sitting in a public file waiting to be casually browsed by a curious attorney. It is shielded by a massive fortress of elite corporate cybersecurity. Apex Vanguard employs some of the most ruthless and advanced digital security experts in the entire country. My personal Social Security number is permanently flagged with a high-priority tripwire designed to protect my assets from corporate espionage. The exact second anyone attempts an unauthorized query against my identity, my security team is instantly notified, complete with the exact IP address, the network host, and the specific terminal location of the incoming search. They can track the digital intrusion down to the specific floor and desk. I was sitting quietly in my home office reviewing the final bankruptcy restructuring plans for Carter's doomed startup when my secure mobile phone suddenly buzzed. It was an urgent encrypted message from my chief of security. He sent me a detailed, irrefutable digital log showing that an IP address, officially registered to Jasmine's law firm, had just attempted a deep dive extraction of my federal tax records. I leaned back in my chair and smiled, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. Jasmine had willingly handed me the exact rope I needed to completely hang her legal career. I calmly downloaded the complete digital footprint of her illegal data search, meticulously saving the exact timestamps, the specific terminal identification number, and the clear violation of federal privacy statutes. I attached all of these damning files to a highly encrypted email, carefully stripping away all identifying sender information to ensure my absolute anonymity. I did not call Jasmine to gloat. I did not warn Carter. I simply forwarded the entire evidence package directly to the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee. I also sent a blind copy directly to the managing compliance partner at her own law firm. While the Ethics Committee silently processed the digital bomb I had just dropped on Jasmine's career, the rest of the family was celebrating a completely fabricated victory. My $1.5 million wire transfer had done exactly what I promised. It immediately satisfied the bank's margin call and successfully kept the federal investigators away from Carter's doorstep. With the immediate threat of prison removed, Carter and Jasmine instantly reverted to their usual unbearable arrogance. They completely ignored the fact that I now held the deed to the family home. In their minds, they had outsmarted everyone. By Sunday evening, Diane insisted on hosting a celebratory family dinner at the house to commemorate Carter's survival. Liam and I were forced to attend, sitting quietly at the edge of the dining room table, while the family treated Carter like a conquering hero. Carter stood at the head of the table, raising a glass of expensive wine. He proudly announced that his tech startup had not only survived the week, but that the elite private equity firm Apex Vanguard had inexplicably resumed their acquisition negotiations. "They realized I am too valuable to lose," Carter boasted, taking a sip of his wine. "The auditors found minor accounting discrepancies, which we easily cleared up with the bridge loan. Now that our books are completely clean, Apex Vanguard wants to push forward with the $60 million buyout. We are going to sign the final paperwork at my corporate gala this coming Friday." Jasmine smiled warmly, resting her hand on Carter's arm. "And I am personally taking over the final legal negotiations," she declared, her chest puffed out with pride. Carter's previous legal team was far too soft. "Apex Vanguard has been dragging their feet, and I am not going to let a bunch of Silicon Valley paper pushers delay my husband's payout." I sent an email directly to their anonymous chief executive officer this morning. I told them exactly how things are going to work from now on. Liam looked at Jasmine with genuine disbelief. "You sent an aggressive email to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar firm," he asked. "Are you actively trying to tank his deal?" Jasmine let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Oh, Liam, stick to teaching high school history. You have absolutely no idea how the corporate world operates. These billionaire types only respect power and dominance." I simply reminded their legal department that they are dealing with a top-tier corporate attorney. I called their current drafting process the work of incompetent amateurs. I demanded they expedite the transfer agreements and have them ready for signature before the Friday gala, or we would walk away and take our technology to their biggest competitor. Diane clapped her hands together, practically glowing with pride. "That is right, Jasmine. You tell them. You two are such a power couple. They are so lucky to be doing business with our family." I kept my eyes locked on my plate, cutting a small piece of chicken so no one could see the massive smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. I knew exactly what email Jasmine was talking about. Half an hour later, Liam and I drove back to our modest suburban house. Liam headed upstairs to grade papers. I walked into the living room, sat down on my comfortable couch, and pulled my secure encrypted phone from my pocket. I opened my executive email portal. Right at the top of my inbox was the message from Jasmine. It was even more unhinged and abusive than she had described at dinner. She had used her official law firm email address to berate my legal team, insulting the intelligence of the Apex Vanguard executive board. She addressed the email directly to the anonymous CEO, demanding immediate compliance. I settled back into the cushions, savoring the sheer audacity of her words. I tapped the reply button. I kept my response incredibly brief, devoid of any emotion, and perfectly calculated to feed her massive ego while setting the final stage. I typed, We acknowledge your terms. We will finalize the acquisition at the Friday gala. Be prepared for a thorough restructuring. I hit send and locked my phone. 10 minutes later, the family group chat lit up with a screenshot of my reply. Jasmine had sent it to everyone. See, Jasmine typed in the chat. I told you they only respect dominance. I just successfully bullied a billionaire CEO into submission. Carter is getting his $60 million on Friday. Get ready to celebrate. Early Monday morning, the atmosphere at the prestigious downtown law firm where Jasmine worked was completely chaotic. The usually quiet mahogany-paneled hallways were buzzing with frantic whispers. Over the weekend, a massive, faceless holding company had executed a hostile buyout, purchasing the majority shares of the firm's founding partners. The senior attorneys were terrified about the impending corporate restructuring and the rumors of mass layoffs. But Jasmine walked into the glass lobby that morning with her head held high, clutching an expensive latte, and completely radiating unearned confidence. While her colleagues huddled in break rooms rapidly updating their resumes, Jasmine saw the corporate takeover not as a threat, but as a long overdue clearing of the dead wood that had been holding the entire firm back for years. She was convinced that the new ownership would immediately recognize her sheer brilliance and elevate her to the coveted role of senior partner. In fact, Jasmine was so confident in her impending promotion that she spent the majority of her billable hours that week completely ignoring her actual legal cases. Her dual computer monitors, which should have been displaying complex corporate litigation files, were instead filled with high-end fashion websites. She was obsessively coordinating her look for Carter's Friday night acquisition gala. She had already ordered a custom silk gown from a boutique in Milan and was currently hunting for the perfect pair of diamond earrings to match the neckline. She wanted to look absolutely flawless when she stood next to Carter as he signed the $60 million paperwork with Apex Vanguard. In her mind, Friday was going to be the grand coronation of the ultimate corporate power couple. She was so absorbed in her own vanity that she completely missed the massive warning signs flashing right in front of her face as she scrolled endlessly through designer shoe catalogs. By Tuesday afternoon, the firm's technology department had been completely taken over by external digital auditors sent by the new holding company. Several junior associates had quietly warned Jasmine that the auditors were specifically pulling compliance reports and checking the usage logs of the firm's restricted background check databases. Anyone else would have instantly panicked, remembering the highly illegal unauthorized search they had run on their sister-in-law just a few days prior. But Jasmine's ego was a fortress of pure delusion. She genuinely believed that the rules did not apply to her. She reasoned that even if they found the search on my social security number, she could easily justify it to the board as necessary due diligence for her wealthy family. She was Jasmine, the brilliant, aggressive attorney who bullied billionaires into submission. A little routine compliance audit was completely beneath her concern today. The climax of her delusion arrived on Wednesday afternoon. Jasmine's desk phone rang sharply. It was the executive assistant for the firm's remaining managing partner, requesting her immediate presence in the top-floor boardroom. Jasmine smiled brightly, quickly reapplying her expensive red lipstick in the reflection of her computer screen. She smoothed her designer skirt, completely certain that the moment had finally arrived. She strutted to the private elevator, her heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor, already planning how she would decorate her new corner office with modern art. When she pushed open the heavy oak doors of the boardroom, the managing partner was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He looked physically ill. His face was pale, his tie was loosened, and his hands were trembling violently as he held a thick manila folder. "Please sit down, Jasmine," the managing partner said, his voice hollow. Jasmine took a seat, crossing her legs elegantly. "You look stressed," she said with a condescending smile. "The restructuring must be taking a toll on the older generation. Do not worry. I am prepared to step up and take a senior partner role to guide the firm into its new era." The managing partner stared at her, baffled by her arrogance. He slowly slid the folder across the table until it rested in front of her. Jasmine, the new ownership, has not finalized promotions yet. However, their transition team sent an urgent directive this morning. The anonymous buyer specifically requested your complete employment file. More importantly, they demanded the unredacted IT logs of your recent unauthorized database searches. Jasmine looked down at the folder, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. Of course they did, she said proudly, completely missing the terror in his eyes. They want to see how a real attorney takes initiative. They saw my emails, they saw my research methods, and they are fast-tracking my promotion. Get my beautiful new corner office completely ready. I am going to run this place by Monday. Friday morning finally arrived. The day of the highly anticipated acquisition gala had dawned. The corporate event was being held at one of the most opulent venues in the downtown financial district. It was an ultra-luxurious black tie affair meant to celebrate the merging of Carter's tech startup and my private equity firm. The family had been frantically preparing for weeks. I was sitting at my kitchen island when my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Jasmine. I unlocked the screen and read the vicious words she had typed. Stella, please do not bother showing up tonight. This is a highly exclusive event for successful people. We have a strict aesthetic to maintain for the billionaire investors who will be attending. Freeloaders walking around in cheap dresses will completely ruin the aesthetic and embarrass the family. Stay home. Liam can ride with us. I did not reply. I locked my phone and set it down. Just then, Liam walked into the kitchen. He had just gotten off a phone call with his mother. Diane had explicitly instructed him to stand in the back near the catering staff, not speak to any corporate guests, and absolutely not mention that he was a public school teacher because it would humiliate Carter in front of the wealthy executives. Liam looked utterly exhausted. He slammed his phone down onto the counter. The color was completely drained from his face. His hands were shaking violently with a mixture of profound sadness and boiling rage. He looked at me, his eyes filled with absolute defeat. I cannot do this anymore, Liam said, his voice cracking under the weight of decades of emotional abuse. I am calling them back right now. I am telling my family I am completely done with them forever. I will not let them treat you like garbage, and I will not spend another second pretending to be the ultimate failure of the family just to stroke Carter's massive ego. He reached aggressively for his phone. I quickly stood up and placed my hand gently over his, stopping his fingers before he could dial. I looked up into his angry eyes and offered him a warm, reassuring smile. I stepped closer, softly adjusting the collar of his button-down shirt. Liam, look at me, I said softly. He paused, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. Do not call them. Do not give them the satisfaction of a screaming match today. I know exactly how much it hurts. I know how deeply they have wounded you over the years. But I need you to trust me tonight more than you ever have before. I smoothed out the fabric of his shirt and held his steady gaze. Just give me until midnight. I promise you will never have to deal with their disrespect again. We are going to that gala tonight, and we are going to walk out completely free. Liam searched my face for a long moment. He saw the absolute certainty in my eyes. He let out a long breath, nodding slowly. Okay, Stella. Whatever you say. I trust you. With Liam calmed down, I walked upstairs to our master bedroom. I stepped inside my expansive walk-in closet. The front section was filled with my usual daily wardrobe. The plain, oversized sweaters, faded denim jeans, and the comfortable, cheap sweatpants that Jasmine constantly mocked me for wearing. For 11 long years, this mundane clothing had been my perfect camouflage. It allowed me to build an absolute financial empire entirely in the shadows, completely undetected by the toxic parasites who arrogantly thought they knew everything about me. I reached out and pushed the row of cheap sweatpants to the side, revealing a hidden climate-controlled section at the very back of the closet. I entered my secure code on the small keypad and the heavy security door clicked open. Inside hung a sleek, heavy black garment bag. I reached up, grabbed the brass zipper, and slowly pulled it down. The harsh closet lighting caught the stunning fabric inside. It was a custom $80,000 haute couture evening gown. It was a masterpiece of dark, elegant silk tailored specifically to my exact measurements by a legendary designer in Paris. It radiated pure, absolute power. Sitting on the shelf above the gown was a small mahogany jewelry box. I carefully opened the heavy lid. Resting on the velvet cushion was a set of flawless diamond earrings that cost more than Jasmine's entire legal education. I stared directly at the sparkling reflection of the heavy diamonds, a cold, calculated smile slowly forming on my face. The era of the quiet freeloader was officially over. Tonight, Apex Vanguard was coming to collect. I quickly zipped the bag and prepared for the final battle. When I stepped out of the closet, Liam actually dropped his car keys on the hardwood floor. He stared at me completely speechless, his eyes taking in the dark, heavy silk of the gown and the brilliant diamonds catching the bedroom light. "You look like a queen," he finally whispered, his voice full of awe and a little bit of shock. He had never seen me wear anything more expensive than a department store blazer. I smiled, taking his arm as we walked out the front door. "We are going to have a very interesting night," I told him. We arrived at the downtown financial district just after 8 o'clock. The event venue was a massive historic ballroom, with vaulted ceilings cascading crystal chandeliers and towering walls lined with thousands of white roses. The room was already packed with the city's absolute elite. I saw powerful Wall Street executives, well-known tech moguls, and ruthless venture capitalists mingling over champagne. I let Liam guide us down the grand marble staircase toward the main floor. The moment we reached the bottom of the steps, I saw them. Carter was standing in the very center of the roped-off VIP section. He was wearing a custom velvet tuxedo holding court with a group of local politicians and bankers. Jasmine was right beside him in her imported Milan silk gown, desperately trying to project the image of old money and untouchable power. Diane and Richard hovered nearby, aggressively soaking up the reflected glory of their golden child. Jasmine happened to glance toward the staircase, and she saw me first. Her smug, confident smile completely vanished from her face. Her jaw physically dropped. She stared at the $80,000 haute couture gown draping perfectly across my frame, and then her eyes locked onto the flawless diamonds resting against my collarbone. She was a woman obsessed with luxury, and she knew instantly that my outfit cost more than her entire annual salary. Diane quickly followed Jasmine's shocked gaze. But instead of being quiet, Diane's sudden jealousy manifested as loud, toxic rage. She marched right up to us, completely ignoring the wealthy corporate guests standing nearby. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Diane hissed loudly, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at my chest. "You maxed out Liam's credit cards for this. You rented fake jewelry and a designer dress just to try and upstage Jasmine at Carter's own corporate gala. You are a pathetic, desperate freeloader, and you are ruining this night." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I just looked at Diane with a calm, pitying expression. Jasmine quickly hurried over, her face flushed red with furious anger. She signaled aggressively for one of the event security guards stationed near the bar. "These two are not on the exclusive VIP list," Jasmine snapped at the large man in the black suit. "They are extended family, but they are causing a scene and ruining the aesthetic. Move them to the overflow seating in the back immediately. Do not let them anywhere near the executive tables." The security guard looked uncomfortable, but gestured for us to follow him. Liam tensed his shoulders, ready to fight back against the public humiliation, but I gently squeezed his hand. "It is perfectly fine," I said smoothly to the guard. "We will gladly take our assigned seats." The guard escorted us away from the glowing chandeliers, leading us to the very back of the massive ballroom. He seated us at a tiny, poorly lit table pushed right up against the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. Waiters constantly brushed past our chairs with trays of dirty plates. From across the massive room, I could see Jasmine glaring at us from the VIP section, looking incredibly satisfied with herself. She genuinely thought she had put the family freeloader back in her miserable place. Carter was nervously checking his heavy gold watch, sweating profusely as he waited for the mysterious Apex Vanguard CEO to finally arrive and sign the $60 million paperwork. He kept looking anxiously toward the grand entrance, completely unaware that his financial savior and executioner was already in the room, sitting quietly next to the dirty dishes. Suddenly, the live classical string quartet stopped playing. The main ballroom lights dimmed, and a heavy hush fell over the wealthy crowd. A tall, distinguished man in a sharp charcoal suit walked up the steps to the main stage. It was my chief operations officer, the proxy, who handled all of my public-facing corporate negotiations. He stepped up to the crystal podium and tapped the microphone. The room fell dead silent. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his deep voice echoing clearly across the expansive ballroom. "Tonight, we are here to discuss the future of Carter's technology startup. Apex Vanguard has officially completed its deep dive forensic due diligence on the company's financial ledgers." Carter puffed out his chest in the VIP section, smiling broadly for the surrounding investors. Jasmine clapped politely, practically vibrating with excitement. The COO paused, his expression remaining completely stoic and unreadable. "To announce our final verdict regarding the $60 million acquisition," he continued, "I will now hand the floor over to the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Vanguard." The moment my chief operations officer finished his sentence, a massive, brilliant white spotlight mounted near the vaulted ceiling suddenly snapped to life. In the VIP section, Carter buttoned his velvet tuxedo jacket and took a confident step forward. He plastered a winning smile across his face, fully expecting the blinding beam of light to land directly on him and illuminate his moment of absolute triumph. Beside him, Jasmine straightened her spine, tilting her chin up to ensure the photographers caught her best angle. Diane let out a small cheer, clapping her hands rapidly. But the spotlight operator did not pause. The massive beam of light swept completely past Carter, ignoring his outstretched hand. It glided effortlessly over the velvet ropes, sweeping across tables filled with confused corporate executives. It continued its deliberate path all the way to the very back of the expansive ballroom. Finally, the spotlight stopped moving. The blinding circle of bright white light landed directly on the small, cramped table pushed up against the swinging doors of the catering kitchen. It landed squarely on me. For a few seconds, absolute confusion reigned over the family. Carter blinked against the harsh glare, his smile faltering as he peered into the back of the room. Jasmine frowned, clearly irritated that the lighting crew had made a glaring technical error. She opened her mouth, likely preparing to yell at a security guard to fix the spotlight. But before she could utter a single word, I calmly pushed my chair back. The scraping sound echoed loudly in the quiet room. I stood up. The harsh, concentrated light caught the thousands of tiny crystal beads woven into my $80,000 haute couture silk gown. The dark fabric shimmered like liquid onyx. The flawless diamond earrings resting against my skin caught the intense beam, throwing sharp, brilliant prisms of light across the walls of the venue. I did not look like a freeloader. I looked exactly like the woman who owned the building, the event, and every single person inside it. The entire ballroom of Wall Street executives, billionaire tech elites, and ruthless venture capitalists fell completely dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. They were staring at the legendary, notoriously private founder who controlled billions of dollars in global assets. Then the silence shattered. A highly respected venture capitalist in the front row stood up and began clapping. Within seconds, the entire room erupted into thunderous, deafening applause. Hundreds of powerful men and women rose to their feet, offering a standing ovation. I stepped away from the dark table and began my long, deliberate walk down the center aisle toward the main stage. The sea of wealthy guests eagerly parted for me, nodding respectfully as I passed. I walked with my head held high, the heavy silk of my gown trailing gracefully behind me. As I approached the VIP section, The reality of the situation violently slammed into my family. Carter was physically frozen, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his mouth gaping open like a fish gasping for air. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. Diane was trembling so violently that the champagne spilled entirely out of her glass, soaking the front of her expensive dress. She grabbed her husband's arm, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. But Jasmine's reaction was the most satisfying. The brilliant, arrogant corporate lawyer looked as if she had just been struck by lightning. Her eyes darted wildly from my face to the stage, desperately trying to process the impossible truth. Her knees buckled slightly, and she had to grab the velvet rope just to keep from collapsing onto the floor. She watched the woman she had mercilessly humiliated for 11 years walk right past her to claim an empire. I did not spare them a glance. I kept my eyes focused ahead. I gracefully climbed the short flight of velvet stairs leading to the main stage. My chief operations officer smiled warmly, bowing his head in profound respect as he stepped aside. He gently handed the microphone to me and stepped back into the shadows. I stood behind the crystal podium, looking out over the sea of faces. The applause slowly died down as the guests retook their seats, eagerly waiting to hear my verdict. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. I scanned the room until my eyes locked perfectly onto the VIP section. I stared directly into Jasmine's terrified eyes, and then shifted my cold gaze to Carter. I leaned forward, bringing my lips close to the microphone. "Good evening. I am Stella, founder and CEO of Apex Vanguard. And Carter, we need to talk about your fraudulent ledger." The murmur in the crowd was instantaneous. The words fraudulent ledger carried through the massive ballroom like a gunshot. Behind me, the towering projector screen flickered to life. My operations team in the back of the room had cued the presentation perfectly. On the massive display, two sets of documents appeared side by side. On the left were the glowing, highly profitable revenue reports Carter had submitted to my firm to secure the $60 million buyout. On the right were the actual devastating financial numbers my forensic auditors had uncovered. The screen clearly highlighted the hidden offshore liabilities, the artificially inflated user metrics, and the massive bank loans Carter had been frantically trying to conceal. The discrepancy was not just a minor accounting error, it was undeniable textbook wire fraud on a multi-million-dollar scale. Every single investor, banker, and tech mogul in the room was staring at the screen. These were people who destroyed careers over decimal points. Seeing blatant fraud projected at a black tie gala was unprecedented. The room erupted into disgusted murmurs and sharp gasps. Carter finally snapped out of his frozen state. Panic took over his entire body. He scrambled forward, pushing past a waiter and practically tripping over the velvet rope of the VIP section. He ran toward the stage, sweat pouring down his forehead, his custom tuxedo suddenly looking ridiculous and poorly fitted. He reached up desperately, trying to grab the microphone from my hand. "Stella, stop this right now!" Carter babbled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "There is a misunderstanding. This is a clerical error. You are misinterpreting the data. You do not understand how startups work. Do not do this. Do not ruin me." I easily stepped back, keeping the microphone entirely out of his reach. I looked down at him with cold detachment. "There is no misunderstanding, Carter," I said clearly, ensuring the entire room heard his pathetic excuses. "You lied to your investors. You lied to your family. You committed federal fraud to fund a lifestyle you could not afford. Apex Vanguard does not buy worthless, bankrupt companies, and we certainly do not do business with criminals." The investors standing near the VIP section were already pulling out their phones, frantically texting their own legal teams and accountants to pull any remaining funding from Carter's sinking ship. Diane was sobbing loudly into her hands, completely devastated that the Golden Child's empire was crumbling in front of the city's elite. Richard was staring blankly at the floor, realizing that he had sold his home to save a son who was going to prison anyway. Jasmine realized that her own reputation was evaporating right alongside her husband's startup. She was a corporate lawyer surrounded by the most powerful people in the industry, and she was currently married to a man being publicly exposed for massive financial crimes. Survival instinct kicked in. She pushed past the crying Diane and marched up to the edge of the stage. Her face was a mask of furious indignation. "You have no right to do this!" Jasmine yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is completely illegal. You are projecting confidential financial documents without authorization. As Carter's legal counsel, I am officially putting you on notice. I will personally sue Apex Vanguard for corporate defamation, tortious interference, and massive emotional distress. I will strip you of every dime you have, Stella. You are nothing but a fraud who got lucky." I looked at Jasmine, taking in her desperate, flailing attempt to reclaim control. I let her finish her little legal tantrum, allowing the quiet ballroom to absorb her hollow threats. Then I smiled. It was a slow, genuinely amused smile. "You are going to sue me, Jasmine?" I asked, my voice calm and conversational over the microphone. "That is going to be incredibly difficult for you to do." Jasmine crossed her arms aggressively. "Watch me. My firm will tear you apart." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the crystal podium. "Jasmine," I said softly, yet loud enough for the entire room to hear, "you might want to check who signed your paychecks this morning." Jasmine froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared up at me from the floor of the ballroom, her perfectly contoured face contorting into a mask of pure confusion. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice losing all of its previous aggressive bite. "My firm is owned by a private holding company." "That is correct," I replied smoothly into the microphone. "A private holding company called Vanguard Holdings. It is a subsidiary of Apex Vanguard. My acquisition team finalized a hostile buyout of your senior partners exactly 48 hours ago. As of Wednesday morning, I own your prestigious law firm, Jasmine. I own your desk. I own your employment contract. And I own the digital security logs you arrogantly thought you could bypass." I raised my hand and gestured to the operations team in the back of the room. The massive projector screen behind me flickered again. The side-by-side comparison of Carter's fraudulent ledgers vanished. In its place, a massive, unredacted compliance report appeared for everyone in the room to see. At the very top of the document was Jasmine's official employee portrait, right next to her state bar license number. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Jasmine physically recoiled, taking a stumbling step backward. She looked up at the screen in absolute horror. "When my transition team audited your firm this week," I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the speakers, "they were specifically looking for the illegal background check you ran on my social security number. But your arrogance was even more destructive than I anticipated. When my forensic accountants dug into your recent billable hours, they found something much more interesting than a simple privacy violation." I clicked a small remote on the podium, and the slide changed. A complex web of bank transfers appeared on the screen, highlighted in bright red. It turns out that Carter's $4 million margin call was not entirely covered by the sale of Richard and Diane's house, I explained to the captivated audience. "You were short. Desperate people do desperate things. According to your own firm's escrow accounts, you illegally authorized the transfer of over $600,000 of protected client funds to a dummy shell corporation. You embezzled from your own corporate clients to cover your husband's massive debts and keep his failing startup afloat for one more week." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could feel the heavy, suffocating weight of the room crushing down on Jasmine. Embezzling client funds is the ultimate unforgivable sin in the legal world. It is not just a career-ending move, it is a guaranteed prison sentence. Jasmine shook her head wildly, tears of panic finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. No, she sobbed, holding her hands up as if she could physically block the screen from projecting the truth. That is a lie. You fabricated those documents. You are setting me up. The digital footprint is irrefutable, I said coldly. You used your own secure terminal. You authorized the transfers using your own biometric login. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, Jasmine. You thought you were an untouchable corporate shark, and I was just a freeloader you could step on. But you were so blinded by your own massive ego that you walked right into a federal crime. I looked down at her from the stage, feeling no pity for the woman who had spent 11 years making my life miserable. As the sole owner of the firm and your new boss, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. You are fired effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building without your belongings. Your access badges have already been deactivated. Jasmine collapsed onto her knees, the heavy silk of her Milan gown pooling around her on the floor. She covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably as her entire identity was completely obliterated in front of the city's elite. But we are not finished, I added, leaning closer to the microphone. Firing you is simply a corporate formality. As an upstanding citizen, I have a legal obligation to report massive financial crimes. I forwarded every single page of your embezzlement logs and Carter's fraudulent financial ledgers to the State Bar Association and the Federal Bureau of Investigation this morning. Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the very back of the grand ballroom swung open with a loud, resounding crash. Heads turned immediately. Two men in dark conservative suits walked into the room. They wore serious expressions, and the unmistakable gold badges of federal agents were clipped to their belts. They did not pause to look at the beautiful chandeliers or the wealthy guests. They walked with absolute terrifying purpose straight down the center aisle, bypassing the VIP tables, completely heading directly toward Carter and Jasmine. Diane let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream. Diane's blood-curdling scream echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the ballroom, completely shattering whatever remained of the elegant atmosphere. The two federal agents did not even flinch at the noise. They moved with practiced mechanical precision, their eyes locked entirely on Carter. Carter tried to take a backward step, bumping hard into the velvet rope, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. One of the agents quickly grabbed Carter by the shoulder, spun him around, and forced his hands behind his back. The cold, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut over Carter's wrists echoed sharply through the silent room. Carter, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and the falsification of official corporate financial records, the taller agent stated, his voice booming with absolute authority. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Carter burst into loud, ugly tears, his knees buckling so much that the agents had to physically hold him upright. He looked desperately toward his terrified wife. Jasmine, do something, he wailed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. You are my lawyer. Tell them this is a massive mistake. But Jasmine did not step forward to defend her husband. Instead, she took 3 rapid steps away from him, her hands raised defensively. I have absolutely nothing to do with this, Jasmine screamed, her voice shrill and frantic as she tried to save her own skin. I am just his wife. I never looked at his ledgers. I never approved his financial disclosures. He lied to me just like he lied to everyone else here. He acted entirely alone. Take him away. I will fully cooperate with the prosecution. The second agent pulled out another pair of handcuffs and stepped directly into Jasmine's path. Actually, ma'am, you are coming with us too, the agent said calmly. Jasmine's eyes widened in sheer panic. What? On what charges? I am a licensed attorney. You cannot arrest me like this. We have a warrant for your detainment as an accessory to federal fraud and the embezzlement of protected client trust funds, the agent replied violently, twisting her arms behind her back. Jasmine fought against the restraints, her expensive silk gown tearing slightly at the shoulder. But it was completely useless. The cuffs clicked shut. The golden child and his corporate lawyer wife were now standing side by side in matching steel bracelets. As the agents began frog-marching the two sobbing criminals down the long center aisle toward the exit, reality finally shattered Diane's deep delusions. She watched her perfect son being dragged away in total disgrace. Then her eyes snapped toward the stage. She saw me standing calmly behind the crystal podium. Diane grabbed Richard by the arm, and the two rushed the stage. They scrambled up the velvet steps, ignoring the horrified stares of the billionaire investors seated at their tables. "Stella, you have to stop this madness immediately." Diane pleaded, tears ruining her heavy makeup as she frantically waved her hands. "You are a billionaire. You own the company. Tell them to drop the charges, hire the best defense attorneys in the country, and bail him out. He is Carter. He is the future of this family." Richard nodded aggressively, his pale face suddenly red with total desperation. "We will pay you back, Stella, whatever it takes. You cannot let your own brother-in-law go to federal prison. Use your influence. Call the agents off right now before they ruin his beautiful life." I stared at them, completely astounded by their unwavering audacity. Even after watching their son commit multi-million-dollar fraud, even after 11 years of treating me like worthless trash, they still believed they were entirely entitled to my money and my absolute protection. Diane took a sudden aggressive step forward and reached out, trying to grab my bare arm. "Please, Stella." Diane cried out desperately, trying to invoke the one word she thought would magically manipulate me into submission. "We are family. You must save your family." Before her fingers could brush my skin, two massive members of my private security detail stepped instantly out of the shadows. They moved smoothly between us, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark, tailored suits. One of the large guards firmly pushed Diane backward, easily forcing the frantic woman to stumble awkwardly down the very first velvet step to the floor. I easily stepped back, flanked by my private security detail. I looked down at the two miserable people who had made my husband's life a living hell for decades. "You sold your house to me to fund a criminal enterprise. You have 30 days to vacate my property. Do not ever contact my husband again." The days following the acquisition gala were an absolute whirlwind of severe legal and public destruction for my brother-in-law and his arrogant wife. The fallout was immediate and utterly devastating. Because I had provided the federal authorities and the State Bar Association with irrefutable digital evidence, the wheels of justice moved with unprecedented speed. By Tuesday morning, the Ethics Committee convened an emergency hearing. Confronted with the unredacted IT logs proving she had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from protected client trust accounts, Jasmine could not even mount a defense. Her legal career was completely annihilated in a matter of minutes. The State Bar permanently stripped her of her license to practice law, destroying the one thing she valued above all else, her prestigious professional identity. Without her massive corporate salary, and with Carter sitting in a federal holding cell after a judge rightfully denied him bail, Jasmine's luxurious lifestyle completely imploded. The federal government immediately froze all of their joint bank accounts and seized their investment portfolios, pending a massive criminal investigation. 2 weeks later, Jasmine faced the ultimate humiliation. Armed federal agents arrived at her multi-million-dollar downtown high-rise condo. Because the property had been heavily leveraged to fund Carter's failing startup, the bank seized it. Jasmine was forcefully evicted. She had to stand on the sidewalk in a cheap tracksuit, weeping as she watched government agents carry out boxes of her beloved designer bags, expensive shoes, and custom jewelry to be auctioned off for victim restitution. She went from being a high-powered, wealthy attorney to a completely broke, disgraced suspect overnight. But narcissists like Jasmine rarely accept defeat gracefully. Stripped of her money and her power, she became incredibly desperate and highly vindictive. She convinced herself that I was still the villain of her story, looking for any possible way to destroy my reputation and perhaps extort a settlement. Jasmine reached out to a prominent local Boston television news network. She pitched them an exclusive, sensational sob story. She completely fabricated a narrative about a jealous, unhinged billionaire sister-in-law who had illegally hacked her firm and framed her out of deep-seated family resentment. The news network, always hungry for a juicy corporate scandal involving extreme wealth and family betrayal, eagerly took the bait. They brought Jasmine into their studio, pampered her with professional hair and makeup, and filmed a tearful hour-long interview where she painted herself as the innocent victim of my ruthless financial bullying. The network heavily promoted the upcoming broadcast, teasing an explosive primetime segment that would expose the dark side of Apex Vanguard. I was sitting quietly in my corner office sipping hot tea and watching the promotional teaser on a flat-screen television when my lead corporate attorney walked into the room. He did not look worried. In fact, he looked incredibly amused. We had been anticipating a desperate public relations stunt like this. You do not build a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm without knowing exactly how to handle a smear campaign. I simply nodded at him, giving the official authorization to execute our countermeasure. Less than 2 hours before Jasmine's tearful interview was scheduled to air on live television, my legal team arrived at the broadcasting network's corporate headquarters. They bypassed the receptionist and walked straight into the executive producer's office, dropping a massive cease and desist packet directly onto his desk. But they did not just bring standard legal threats. They brought irrefutable proof. My lawyers handed the producer a secure tablet and pressed play. The audio recording was crystal clear. It was from the security cameras at Richard and Diane's house mixed with the digital records we had legally acquired. The producer listened in absolute horror as Jasmine's own voice filled the room, calling me a pathetic freeloader, aggressively bragging about using illegal legal loopholes, and openly admitting to manipulating corporate funds to cover Carter's debts. It was a complete, undeniable confession to multiple financial crimes wrapped in her usual toxic arrogance. My lead attorney looked the pale executive producer dead in the eye. He calmly informed the network that if they broadcasted a single second of Jasmine's fabricated story, Apex Vanguard would sue the network into total bankruptcy for broadcasting known malicious defamation. The network executives panicked. They immediately pulled the promotional teasers from the airwaves. They scrubbed every mention of the interview from their social media platforms. Then the producer marched down to the green room where Jasmine was waiting for her live debut. He threw the door open, ordered security to escort her out of the building, and permanently banned her from the premises. Jasmine's final desperate attempt to ruin me was completely crushed before it even began, leaving her with absolutely nothing to say. With Jasmine neutralized and Carter awaiting trial in a federal detention center, the 30-day eviction notice I served to Richard and Diane finally expired. I gave them a full month to pack their belongings and find a new place to live, with whatever meager savings they had left. Instead of acting like adults, they chose to live in a state of stubborn denial. On the morning of the eviction, they refused to leave the property. They locked the heavy front door, drew all the window curtains tight, and barricaded themselves inside the massive suburban house that now legally belonged to me. By noon, panic set in. Diane started calling Liam frantically from her phone. She left 6 voicemails in an hour, weeping hysterically into the receiver, desperately begging her younger son to come to his senses. She pleaded with him to make his ruthless wife show human mercy to his aging parents. She played the victim, perfectly crying about how unfair it was to throw them out onto the street after everything they endured with Carter. Liam did not answer her phone calls, but he showed up to the property. Just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a county sheriff patrol cruiser pulled into the long driveway of the estate. Right behind the police vehicle was my sleek black Maybach. Liam calmly stepped out of the luxurious back seat. He did not come to negotiate a peaceful resolution, and he certainly did not come to save them from their terrible decisions. He came to personally supervise the sheriff executing the legal eviction order. The armed deputies marched up the steps and pounded heavily on the front door, announcing their presence and demanding immediate entry. When Richard finally pulled open the door, looking incredibly pale and completely defeated, Diane aggressively pushed past him. She saw Liam standing on the edge of the front porch and rushed forward, crying out his name, trying to throw her arms around his neck. Liam took a firm, deliberate step backward, raising his hand to stop her from touching him. The deputies quickly stepped between them, loudly instructing Richard and Diane to gather their immediate personal belongings and exit the premises. Diane completely ignored the law enforcement officers, choosing instead to scream directly at Liam. She angrily demanded to know how he could do something so evil to his own flesh and blood. Liam looked down at his mother. His expression was not angry or vindictive. It was completely empty. That profound emptiness was far more devastating than any explosive screaming match could ever be. For the very first time in his life, Liam looked directly at his parents and spoke his absolute truth. "You did this to yourselves," Liam said, his voice remarkably steady and calm. "You spent 30 years treating me like a massive disappointment simply because I chose to be a teacher instead of a ruthless corporate shark. You happily remortgaged this exact house completely, risking your own financial future just to fund Carter's massive ego. You watched your daughter-in-law constantly humiliate my wife for 11 long years, and you laughed right along with her every single time. You demanded that I take out a predatory loan to cover for a federal criminal. You have never truly been a family to me. You were just a heavy burden I was forced to carry around. And today, I am finally putting that burden down for good. I do not love you anymore. There is absolutely nothing left to save." Diane gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck by a blow. Richard stood frozen in the open doorway, the harsh reality of his ruined life finally crashing down on his exhausted shoulders. The sheriff deputies did not care about the emotional family drama unfolding on the porch. They gave Richard and Diane 15 minutes to pack 3 large suitcases with their clothes. Then the officers physically escorted the weeping couple out the front door and marched them down the driveway. A professional locksmith arrived moments later and began drilling out the deadbolts to change the locks. Diane sat heavily on one of her expensive suitcases by the curb, sobbing uncontrollably into her trembling hands. She looked up just in time to watch Liam turn his back on her forever. He walked confidently down the long driveway and climbed into the plush leather back seat of my chauffeured Maybach. The dark-tinted windows rolled up, shutting her out of his life. As the luxury vehicle slowly pulled away, leaving her stranded on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, Diane finally realized the horrific truth of her choices. She had thrown away a loyal son to fiercely protect a convicted felon, and now she was left with absolutely nothing. As Richard and Diane vanished into the bleak reality of their impoverished lives, the federal case against Carter rapidly gained momentum. Facing a minimum of 20 years behind bars, Carter's golden child arrogance completely shattered under the intense pressure of the justice system. He quickly realized that his Ivy League charm and his mother's endless praise meant absolutely nothing to the United States government. Desperate to save his own skin and terrified of the harsh reality of prison life, Carter did exactly what entitled people always do when backed into a corner. He ruthlessly turned on the person closest to him. Without a moment of hesitation, Carter sat down with the federal prosecutors and signed a comprehensive plea agreement. In exchange for a significantly reduced sentence, he offered undeniable proof that his brilliant corporate lawyer wife was the actual mastermind behind the entire financial scheme. Carter handed over a massive cache of encrypted emails, private text messages, and handwritten legal notes. These documents explicitly proved that Jasmine deliberately structured the illegal shell companies and actively coached him on exactly how to bypass the federal auditing software. He painted himself as a naive entrepreneur who was simply following the complex, coercive legal advice of his incredibly manipulative and greedy wife. Jasmine was absolutely blindsided by her husband's cold-blooded betrayal. She had spent her entire marriage enabling his massive ego and risking her own professional license to fund his extravagant lifestyle, and her ultimate reward was being thrown directly under the federal bus. Because she had already been publicly disbarred and had her personal assets completely frozen by the government, Jasmine could not even afford to hire a competent criminal defense attorney. The elite legal community in Boston, the same people she used to socialize with at high-end charity galas, completely blacklisted her. They refused to take her phone calls, ignored her frantic emails, and instructed their receptionist to turn her away at the door. Facing the terrifying prospect of relying on an overworked public defender and a guaranteed lengthy prison sentence, Jasmine completely snapped. She abandoned whatever remaining shreds of pride she possessed. On a cold, rainy Tuesday afternoon, she marched straight into the towering glass lobby of the Apex Vanguard corporate headquarters. She looked like a tragic ghost of her former glamorous self. She was wearing a cheap, wrinkled raincoat, her hair was a messy knot, and her face was completely devoid of makeup. She aggressively pushed her way past the marble reception desk, demanding to speak with the chief executive officer immediately. Corporate security instantly intercepted her, firmly grabbing her arms to physically drag her out. I was sitting in my top-floor corner office, reviewing a quarterly earnings report, when my head of security called to inform me of the chaotic disturbance in the lobby. Instead of having her thrown out onto the wet street, I made a different decision. I told security to bring her up to the 50th floor. I wanted to look her in the eye one last time and witness the final collapse of her massive ego. When the heavy oak doors to my executive office opened, Jasmine practically stumbled into the massive room. The two security guards stood silently by the door, ready to intervene as she closed the distance between us. I remained comfortably seated behind my massive mahogany desk, my face completely expressionless. Jasmine did not yell. She did not threaten me with absurd defamation lawsuits like she had at the gala. Instead, her legs simply gave out. The woman who had spent 11 agonizing years calling me a worthless freeloader and a pathetic charity case fell directly onto her knees right on my imported office rug. She began sobbing hysterically, tears streaming down her pale face, begging me for mercy. She desperately pleaded for a personal loan, asking for just enough cash to hire a decent defense lawyer so she would not spend the best years of her life in a concrete cell. She promised to pay me back every single penny with interest, swearing loudly that Carter had manipulated her and crying that we were still family. I let her cry for exactly 2 minutes. I watched the pathetic display of a broken narcissist who finally understood the terrifying consequences of her own horrific actions in total silence. Then I slowly opened the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out my leather wallet and extracted a $10 bill. I placed it on the polished mahogany surface and smoothly slid it across the desk until it stopped right in front of her tear-stained face. "Here," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "For the bus ride home. You are trespassing." Security escorted her out of the building, her sobs echoing down the hallway until the heavy elevator doors finally slid shut. The wheels of federal justice grind slowly, but when they finally crush you, they leave absolutely nothing behind. 6 months after her pathetic display in my office, the highly publicized trial of Carter and his fraudulent tech startup reached its inevitable conclusion in a packed Boston courtroom. Carter stood before a federal judge entirely stripped of his arrogant smirk and his tailored velvet suits. The judge was not swayed by his Ivy League background, his tearful apologies, or his desperate attempts to blame his investors. The evidence I provided was bulletproof. Carter was officially sentenced to 8 solid years in a federal prison, followed by a decade of supervised release and a mandatory legal order to pay back millions in victim restitution. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, he looked smaller and more pathetic than ever before. He was no longer the golden child. He was just another convicted felon heading to a concrete cell. Jasmine, on the other hand, barely managed to scrape together enough money for a bargain bin defense attorney, using the absolute last of her liquidated personal assets. Terrified of spending a single night behind bars, she eagerly accepted a brutal plea deal offered by the prosecution. She avoided actual jail time by turning state's evidence against her husband, but the conditions of her continued freedom were financially and socially devastating. The judge hit her with massive criminal fines that effectively guaranteed her meager future wages would be heavily garnished for the rest of her natural life. Furthermore, because her crimes involved the severe abuse of public trust as an attorney, she was sentenced to 3,000 hours of mandatory court-supervised community service. She had lost every single wealthy friend she ever had. Nobody wanted to be associated with a disgraced, disbarred lawyer. The universe has a brilliant, undeniable sense of poetic justice. For over a decade, Jasmine had built her entire identity around projecting immense wealth. She was a woman who routinely draped herself in imported Milan silk and carried thousands of dollars worth of Gucci accessories on her arm just to go to the grocery store. She viewed anyone who performed manual labor as completely beneath her, treating service workers, catering staff, and even my husband as if they were invisible peasants. Now her daily reality was a sharp, humiliating contrast to her former life of corporate luxury. On a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in late July, Jasmine was fulfilling her court-ordered community service on the side of a busy Boston highway. She was forced to wear a bright, oversized neon orange safety vest over a cheap, stained gray t-shirt and baggy sweatpants. A heavy plastic trash bag was slung over her aching shoulder, and she held a cheap metal grabber tool in her blistered hands. Her hair, once perfectly styled at expensive downtown salons every single week, was tied back in a messy, frizzy ponytail beneath a faded baseball cap. A stern probation officer sat in an idling white government van nearby, watching her every move to ensure she did not stop working. Cars sped past her at 70 miles an hour, violently kicking up road dust and hot exhaust fumes directly into her face. She wiped the stinging sweat from her forehead with a cheap, dirty glove, her body intensely aching from the grueling physical labor. A discarded fast food cup blew past her heavy boots, and she had to awkwardly chase it down the steep, rocky embankment. She gritted her teeth in sheer agony, quietly cursing her incarcerated husband, cursing the federal justice system, and cursing the brutal, unforgiving summer heat. She was completely exhausted, utterly humiliated, and entirely alone. As she bent down to stab a crushed soda can with her metal grabber, a sudden flash of bright light from above caught her attention. She stood up straight, rubbing her exhausted eyes, and looked up at the towering digital billboard looming directly over the busy highway interchange. The massive screen transitioned from a local car dealership advertisement to a high-definition towering image that made Jasmine drop her trash bag directly onto the dirt. It was the brand-new, highly anticipated cover of Forbes magazine. Standing fiercely on the cover, dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored Armani business suit, with my arms crossed confidently, was me. Below my picture, rendered in massive, bold white letters for the entire city of Boston to see, was the headline, "Stella Vanguard, the most powerful woman in private equity." Jasmine stood completely frozen on the side of the hot highway, tightly gripping her cheap trash grabber, staring up at the billionaire freeloader who had finally conquered her entire world. While Jasmine stared at my face on a digital billboard during her miserable probation, I was busy erasing the last physical reminder of her toxic influence. The sprawling house I purchased from Richard and Diane sat empty at the end of its cul-de-sac. It was the house where Liam had been ignored for decades, where his parents plotted to ruin our lives, and what ultimately funded Carter's criminal enterprise. I had no intention of ever living in it, and I refused to let another family move into a place with such a dark history. So on a crisp autumn morning, Liam and I stood on the sidewalk with coffees in hand, watching a yellow bulldozer drive straight through the front door. We stood in comfortable silence for hours, watching the heavy machinery tear down the brick walls, rip up the hardwood floors, and level the structure until there was absolutely nothing left but a flat plot of dirt. It was the most profound, deeply cathartic experience of our lives. But I did not tear down the past just to leave an empty void. I had a much better vision for the future of that land. Over the next 8 months, I poured a fraction of my personal wealth into a massive construction project on that exact spot. Where the toxic family estate once stood, a stunning state-of-the-art community center, an interactive history museum now rose from the ground. It was a brilliant architectural masterpiece of glass, steel, and natural wood, designed specifically to serve the underprivileged youth of the greater Boston area. It featured high-tech classrooms, a massive public library, and beautiful open spaces for local students to learn and grow safely. But I was not the one running it. On the day of the grand opening ribbon-cutting ceremony, I proudly stood in the audience while the mayor of Boston handed the ceremonial golden scissors to my husband. I had officially named Liam as the president and head of the board of directors for the entire institution. For his entire life, his parents had constantly belittled his passion for teaching. They had called him a financial failure and compared him unfavorably to his fraudulent brother. Now Liam was standing at the podium, a respected leader in the community, running a massive educational institution that would positively impact the lives of thousands of students for generations to come. He was absolutely glowing, without the heavy, suffocating shadow of his narcissistic family constantly dragging him down. Liam completely thrived. He hired incredible educators, launched massive community outreach programs, and finally received the profound professional respect and admiration he had always deserved. He was no longer the forgotten second son. He was a pillar of the community, completely free from the toxic expectations that had once defined his existence. Of course, whenever you achieve massive public success, the parasites from your past inevitably try to crawl their way back into your light. A few weeks after the grand opening of the center, Liam was sitting in his spacious new corner office, reviewing scholarship applications. His executive assistant walked in and handed him a small stack of daily mail. Right in the middle of the crisp, professional envelopes was a cheap, crumpled envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was incredibly shaky and erratic, but Liam recognized the cursive loops immediately. It was his mother. Diane had mailed the letter directly to the community center, knowing she was legally blocked from contacting our personal phones or our private residence. Liam stared at his name written in her handwriting. He could see through the thin, cheap paper. He could make out the frantic, pathetic words written inside. Diane was begging. She wrote that she and Richard were currently living in a cramped, moldy trailer park 2 hours outside of the city. She complained that Richard's health was failing due to the immense stress of Carter's prison sentence, and she desperately asked if Liam could find it in his heart to send his poor, suffering parents a few $100s just to help them buy basic groceries for the week. She tried to invoke the sacred concept of family one last time, hoping to successfully manipulate the kind, empathetic boy she had spent 30 years emotionally abusing. Liam quietly held the cheap, wrinkled envelope in his hand for a long moment, feeling the familiar weight of her toxic guilt trip, trying to pull him back into the miserable darkness. Then his face softened into a calm, peaceful smile. He did not even bother to open the envelope. He did not read any of the pathetic, desperate excuses. He simply turned completely around and dropped the sealed, unopened letter directly into his heavy-duty electric paper shredder. Exactly 1 year after that pathetic letter vanished into the electric paper shredder, Liam and I were celebrating our wedding anniversary. But instead of sitting through another stiff, unbearable family dinner at a pretentious seafood restaurant, we were thousands of miles away. We were lounging on the polished teak deck of a private luxury yacht, cutting through the waters off the coast of Amalfi, Italy. The warm Mediterranean sun was slowly setting over the cliffs, casting a glow across the ocean. I was wearing a sundress, holding a glass of champagne, while Liam sat beside me in relaxed summer clothes. The ocean breeze was incredibly peaceful. There was no screaming, no gaslighting, and no advice from arrogant relatives. Liam clinked his glass against mine, offering a smile. "Happy anniversary, Stella," he said softly. "I still cannot believe how much our lives have changed in just 1 year." I took a slow sip of the champagne and leaned back against the cushions. "I am just glad we finally have some peace," I replied. Liam looked out at the waves, his expression turning thoughtful. "You know," he began, "I never actually asked you why you kept the true scale of Apex Vanguard a secret for so long. I knew you were a successful investor. I saw the comfortable life you provided for us, and I knew your freelance consulting was profitable. But a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, that is a secret to keep from a husband for 11 years. I reached out and rested my hand over his. I looked into his eyes, wanting him to understand the truth. I never hid my wealth to deceive you, Liam. I hid the zeros to protect you. I saw how your parents and your brother operated from the first day we met. I saw how Diane worshipped Carter because he chased money and status. I watched them sacrifice your financial future to fund his Ivy League ego. Your family treated wealth like a weapon to dominate others. If they had known I possessed that kind of capital, they would have never left us alone. They would have constantly demanded loans, investments, and bailouts. They would have drained our energy and tried to manipulate my assets. They were financial parasites. I chose to wear sweatpants and let Jasmine call me a freeloader because being underestimated was the ultimate shield. It kept the parasites away from our marriage until we were ready to eradicate them. Liam squeezed my hand, a look of profound realization washing over his face. You were right, he admitted. If they knew about your billions, Diane would have moved into our house, and Carter would have demanded a board seat at your firm. Your silence literally saved us from being consumed by their greed. We sat together in a comfortable, loving silence, watching the Italian coastline drift by. The heavy burden of his toxic family was officially a ghost of the past. We had successfully navigated the worst storm of our lives and emerged completely victorious. Suddenly, the peaceful quiet of the Mediterranean evening was interrupted by a soft buzzing sound. I reached over to the small table and picked up my highly secure encrypted mobile phone. The screen displayed an incoming call from my chief of security back in Boston. I rarely received calls from him while on vacation unless it was an absolute emergency or a highly significant update. I swiped the screen to answer. Go ahead, I said clearly. Madam Chairwoman. My chief of security said, his deep voice crackling slightly over the satellite connection. I apologize for interrupting your anniversary trip, but I felt you would want to hear this latest development immediately. It concerns your sister-in-law. I sat up slightly. My interest instantly piqued. What did Jasmine do now? As you know, after her disbarment and bankruptcy, she was forced to take a minimum wage job as a cashier at a local grocery store to satisfy the terms of her federal probation. Well, it appears she could not handle the lifestyle downgrade. The store manager noticed discrepancies in her daily cash drawer. They reviewed the security footage. Jasmine was caught actively stealing cash from the register as well as hiding expensive imported groceries in her bag at the end of her shifts. I let out a sharp, amused laugh. She stole from a grocery store. Yes, ma'am, he confirmed. The local police were called. Because she is currently serving thousands of hours of court-ordered community service for a massive federal financial crime, this new theft is a direct, severe violation of her probation agreement. She was arrested on the spot. The judge officially revoked her probation this morning. Jasmine is currently being transferred to a state correctional facility. She is officially incarcerated. Thank you for the update, I said softly into the receiver. Keep me informed if anything else develops, but otherwise consider this matter entirely closed. I ended the call and set the secure phone face down on the small teak table. Liam was looking at me, his brow furrowed with mild concern. He had only heard my side of the conversation, but he could easily read the shift in my posture. What exactly was that phone call about? Liam asked, leaning forward slightly. I looked out at the rolling waves, watching the water catch the brilliant orange and purple hues of the Italian sunset. It was my security team, I replied, my voice steady. Jasmine was caught stealing from the cash register at her grocery store job. They revoked her probation. She is officially incarcerated in a maximum security state correctional facility. Liam let out a slow, heavy breath. He leaned back against the plush cushions of the yacht, digesting the information. There was no triumphant cheering from either of us. We did not pop another expensive bottle of champagne or laugh loudly at her miserable downfall. When you have finally healed from years of intense toxic abuse, the ultimate destruction of your abuser does not bring a massive rush of euphoric joy. It just brings a profound, quiet sense of permanent closure. The heavy book had finally been slammed shut. For 11 agonizing years, Jasmine had aggressively pushed the false narrative that I was a pathetic, worthless freeloader. She built her entire identity around feeling superior to me, convincing the rest of the family that I was nothing more than a parasite draining Liam of his meager resources. But that hateful narrative was now entirely dead. It was permanently buried under the massive, crushing weight of undeniable reality. Jasmine was the true parasite, a common thief who stole from her own legal clients and pilfered from a grocery store, till while I was the architect of a billion-dollar empire. The absolute irony of the situation was not lost on me, but I felt absolutely no need to gloat over her ruined life. The objective truth had already done all the heavy lifting. Sitting there on the polished deck of the yacht, feeling the warm Mediterranean breeze gently blow against my skin, I realized something incredibly important. I had spent a full decade meticulously building a massive financial fortune. I controlled billions of dollars in liquid global assets, commanded elite legal teams across the country, and owned prime real estate in multiple major cities. But my absolute greatest asset was never my bank account or my investment portfolio. The true meaning of wealth is not about how many imported designer bags you can buy or how loudly you can brag at a fancy family dinner party. True power is the profound ability to remain absolutely silent. My greatest weapon was my unparalleled emotional discipline and patience. I let them fully believe their own ridiculous lies. I let them completely underestimate my intelligence. I allowed Jasmine to hurl insults directly to my face without ever raising my voice or desperately defending my bruised ego. I simply observed their reckless, arrogant behavior, gathered the necessary legal ammunition, and patiently waited in the shadows. I did not strike back when I was feeling angry or insulted. I struck only when the strategic timing was absolutely perfect. And when I finally did strike, the blow was entirely fatal to their entire toxic ecosystem. I let their massive, fragile egos aggressively dig their own deep graves, and I simply handed them the shiny shovels. The sun was sinking much lower now, dipping perfectly below the horizon and painting the evening sky in deep, breathtaking shades of crimson and violet. The luxury yacht rocked gently on the calm, peaceful waters. I looked lovingly at Liam, who was staring out at the beautiful coastline, a look of absolute untroubled peace resting comfortably on his handsome face. He was finally free from the heavy chains of his dark past. We were both finally free to live our beautiful lives on our own terms entirely. I turned away from the gorgeous ocean horizon and looked directly into the camera lens, breaking the invisible fourth wall between my personal story and you, the viewer sitting comfortably at home. I want to take a moment to speak directly to you right now. I know exactly how much it deeply hurts when toxic family members constantly belittle your daily existence. I know the burning, desperate urge to scream the absolute truth, to show them your bank accounts, your hard-earned achievements, and your true worth, just to make them stop treating you like total garbage. But I need you to carefully understand the incredible, undeniable power of your own silence today. When you are dealing with narcissists like Carter and Jasmine, you have to realize that their toxic behavior has absolutely nothing to do with your actual worth. Narcissists operate from a place of deep, unacknowledged insecurity and a desperate need for absolute control. They constantly need a designated scapegoat to project their own massive failures and insecurities onto. For 11 long years, I was their convenient scapegoat. They needed me to be the pathetic, unemployed freeloader because it allowed them to feel vastly superior without ever having to genuinely examine their own massive, glaring flaws. People like my former sister-in-law construct a completely fabricated reality where they are always the brilliant, untouchable heroes and everyone else is just a supporting character or a miserable villain. If you try to disrupt that incredibly fragile fantasy with logical facts, bank statements, or emotional appeals, they will only attack you harder. They are completely committed to misunderstanding you, because genuinely understanding you would force them to confront the incredibly ugly truth about themselves. This is exactly why arguing with people who are deeply committed to misunderstanding you is a complete and total waste of your precious breath. I see so many incredibly smart, highly capable people exhausting themselves every single day, trying desperately to prove their value to toxic family members or abusive narcissistic colleagues. You bring them irrefutable proof of your accomplishments, you carefully and patiently explain your hurt feelings, and you desperately wait for that one magical moment where they finally apologize and validate your existence. Let me save you years of agonizing heartache and frustration right now. That moment of validation is never going to come. When you argue with a narcissist, you are just feeding their massive ego. You are giving them the exact emotional reaction they desperately crave. You are showing them that they still have significant power over your emotional state and your daily peace of mind. Every single time you try to defend yourself against their baseless, cruel insults, you are unknowingly playing their twisted game on their home turf. And you can never, ever beat a toxic person by playing by their broken rules. You beat them by completely walking off the field. That realization brings me to my core personal philosophy. It is the exact mindset that allowed me to survive a full decade of constant daily humiliation and emerge completely victorious. You must learn to let them underestimate you. You must actively embrace the incredible, undeniable freedom of being completely misunderstood by the wrong people. When someone insists on believing that you are a failure, let them believe their own miserable lies. Do not waste a single ounce of your valuable energy trying to change their narrow minds. It is a completely useless battle that will only leave you feeling exhausted and incredibly bitter at the end of the day. Instead, take all of that intense frustration, all of that burning anger from being constantly disrespected, and channel it directly into your own secret, undeniable growth. While they are busy talking behind your back and spreading vicious rumors, you must be busy building an empire they cannot touch. While they are obsessing over expensive designer clothes, fake social status, and desperately seeking the approval of other shallow people, you must be obsessively mastering your craft. You must be quietly securing your independent finances, expanding your knowledge, and laying down the impenetrable heavy bricks of your own massive future. The darkness of their shadow is actually the absolute perfect place for you to quietly grow strong. They will never ever see you coming because their own massive, fragile ego acts as a permanent blinding blindfold. They are so incredibly focused on tearing you down with their empty words that they completely fail to notice the massive fortress you are quietly constructing right next to them. Building your empire in absolute silence requires a massive amount of emotional discipline. It requires you to smile politely when you are being insulted to your face. It requires you to bite your tongue when you have the perfect comeback ready and waiting. But the delayed gratification is absolutely worth every single second of temporary discomfort. When you finally reveal your hand, the profound shock on their faces will be the only apology you will ever need to see. You do not need to scream your success from the rooftops when the sheer magnitude of your reality speaks entirely for itself. Your success will become the ultimate, undeniable truth that shatters their pathetic delusions forever. And when that glorious day finally arrives, they will have absolutely nothing left to say to you. If you have a Jasmine in your life right now taking credit for your work or insulting your worth, listen closely to my next words. You must take decisive action today. You need to start protecting yourself immediately. The very first step is to document absolutely everything you possibly can. Toxic people rely entirely on gaslighting and plausible deniability. They will continuously twist your words, deny their own harmful actions, and completely rewrite history to make themselves look like the innocent victim in every single scenario. Do not let them get away with it. Save every single text message, forward every aggressive email to a secure private folder, and keep a quiet, highly detailed written record of their behavior. Having hard evidence is the ultimate shield against a master manipulator. More importantly, you must secure your finances completely independently. Do not merge all of your financial accounts with someone who does not respect you, and never allow a toxic relative to have any access whatsoever to your personal credit or your hard-earned savings. Financial independence is the ultimate undeniable escape hatch. When you fully control your own money, You fundamentally control your own future destiny. They cannot trap you in a miserable, suffocating situation if they cannot control your wallet. Money gives you the raw, untouchable power to walk away whenever you choose to do so. It firmly guarantees that you will never be trapped by financial desperation. We are socially conditioned to believe that family is absolutely everything. We are repeatedly told that we must constantly forgive people simply because they share our bloodline or married into our family tree. But let me be entirely clear with you right now. A familial title is not a free pass for ongoing abuse. Being a mother, a father, a brother, or a sister-in-law does not give anyone the right to tear down your self-esteem, manipulate your resources, or treat you with chronic disrespect. If a complete stranger spoke to you the way your toxic relatives do, you would walk away from them without a second thought. You need to apply that exact same standard to your own family. Respect is a mandatory baseline for any relationship, not an optional upgrade. If they cannot meet that basic standard, they simply do not deserve a seat at your dinner table. Cutting off a toxic family member does not make you a bad, ungrateful person. It simply makes you a strong, self-aware person who finally respects themselves enough to enforce healthy, impenetrable boundaries for their own mental survival. You must completely stop setting yourself on fire just to keep these incredibly ungrateful and manipulative people warm. I want to paint a very clear picture of what life actually looks like on the other side of that difficult decision. At first, it might feel incredibly terrifying to walk away from the only dynamic you have ever known. You might feel a sharp pang of guilt or mourn the supportive family you always wished you had. But very quickly, that initial fear is completely replaced by an overwhelming, beautiful sense of absolute peace. Imagine waking up on a Sunday morning without that heavy, sickening pit of deep anxiety in your stomach. Imagine your phone ringing and not instantly bracing yourself for a vicious verbal attack or a manipulative guilt trip. The silence they leave behind is not empty or lonely at all. It is beautifully filled with the vital healing space you desperately need to finally breathe properly, heal, and deeply discover who you really are without their constant heavy criticism dragging you down every single day of your life. It allows you to finally explore your own unique personal passions. Think about the upcoming holidays. Instead of sitting around a tense dining room table, desperately trying to avoid conversational landmines while someone openly mocks your career choices or your clothing, you get to choose your own company. You get to surround yourself only with people who genuinely celebrate your presence and uplift your spirit. You can build a beautiful, chosen family built entirely on mutual love, honest communication, and authentic respect. The food tastes better, the laughter is actually real, and the joy is not a fragile, exhausting performance designed to keep a narcissist happy. You absolutely deserve that level of profound, beautiful peace. You deserve to live a wonderful, thriving life where you do not have to constantly shrink your own brilliant light just to accommodate the massive, fragile ego of another person. You deserve to be celebrated for exactly who you are right now, without conditions, and without demanding expectations. They called me a freeloader. But the truth is, the only things living for free were the delusions in their heads. Now it is time for you to serve your own eviction notices. Take back your incredible power today, reclaim your personal joy, and permanently remove their bitter toxicity from your beautiful life. As I look back on the incredible journey that brought me to this peaceful sunset on the Amalfi Coast, I want to give you a final update on the people who tried to destroy us. The contrast between our current reality and theirs is the ultimate proof that karma is not just a concept, it is an absolute certainty when you let toxic people dig their own graves. Carter is currently serving his 8th month in a maximum security federal penitentiary. According to the few brief updates we receive from the legal system, he is completely miserable. The golden child who once wore custom velvet tuxedos and drank expensive champagne is now wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit and eating bland cafeteria food. He spends his days working in the prison laundry room for pennies an hour, entirely stripped of the massive ego and unearned privilege that defined his entire existence. His fraudulent empire is completely gone, and he will spend the next 7 years locked in a concrete box, completely isolated from the wealthy high society he so desperately craved. Richard and Diane are experiencing their own distinct brand of miserable isolation. After being legally evicted from the beautiful estate that I tore down, they remained in that cramped, moldy trailer park. But their misery was completely compounded by their own toxic behavior. Without Liam to use as their emotional punching bag, and with Carter locked away behind iron bars, they quickly turned their bitter resentment entirely on each other. Their marriage completely deteriorated into endless screaming matches over who was truly responsible for losing the family fortune. They have entirely alienated whatever extended family they had left. Nobody answers their phone calls anymore. Nobody invites them to holiday dinners. They are completely estranged from the world, trapped in a tiny space, with nothing but their own regret and the crushing realization that their obsessive favoritism cost them absolutely everything. And then there is Jasmine, the brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney who built her entire personality around belittling me and flaunting her designer wealth. She is currently housed in a state correctional facility for violating her federal probation. The woman who once demanded the best table at expensive downtown restaurants is now confined to a small cell with a metal toilet. Her law license is permanently revoked. Her bank accounts remain entirely frozen to pay back the clients she selfishly embezzled from. Every single trace of her former arrogance has been completely stripped away by the harsh, unforgiving reality of the state prison system. She will spend the next few years wearing the exact same cheap uniform clothing she used to relentlessly mock me for wearing. The massive irony of her situation is the most perfect poetic justice I could have ever imagined. As for Liam and me, our lives have never been more beautiful or profoundly fulfilling. Without the suffocating weight of his toxic family dragging us down, our marriage has thrived in ways we never thought possible. Liam is a deeply respected leader in our community, changing the lives of countless young students every single day at the new educational center. I continue to aggressively expand Apex Vanguard, acquiring new assets and building my empire entirely on my own terms. We spend our weekends traveling, exploring the world, and surrounding ourselves only with people who genuinely love and support us. We are deeply in love, incredibly successful, and most importantly, we are completely and entirely free. We finally built the beautiful life we always deserved, not by fighting loudly in the mud with miserable people, but by rising silently above them and letting our undeniable success be the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner. Now I want to turn the conversation over to you. Have you ever let someone believe a lie about you only to destroy them with the truth later? How did it feel when the mask finally slipped and they realized they had completely underestimated you? Please take a brief moment right now to share your unique personal experiences in the comments. I genuinely appreciate your valuable time, and I want to read every single one of your stories in the comments below. It takes immense courage to permanently walk away from toxic people who constantly demand your blind loyalty, but actively refuse to give you basic human respect. If my journey gave you the strength to stand up to your own toxic family, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Remember, your silence isn't weakness. It's a loaded weapon. Please take care of yourselves and prioritize your own peace. Until next time, stay strong, stay building, and never let them see you coming. Outro music plays as the screen fades to black. The story of Stella's ultimate triumph over her toxic in-laws highlights a profound and often overlooked lesson: the unmatched power of silence and emotional discipline. For 11 years, she endured being labeled a freeloader without ever feeling the need to correct her abusers or desperately defend her ego. In a world that constantly urges us to clap back and immediately prove our worth to those who mistreat us, Stella's journey offers a vital perspective. Arguing with narcissistic individuals who are deeply committed to their own fabricated reality is a dangerous trap. When you try to justify your existence or wave your achievements in their faces, you are playing by their broken rules and feeding their fragile egos. Stella realized that her abuser's harsh opinions did not dictate her objective reality. By choosing not to engage in their petty, dramatic battles, she preserved her precious mental energy and actively redirected it toward building a massive empire entirely in the shadows. This narrative teaches us that we do not need to attend every argument we are invited to. True power lies in comfortably letting toxic people underestimate you. When you are quietly securing your financial independence, mastering your craft, and laying the heavy bricks of your own impenetrable fortress, the hollow noise of critics becomes utterly irrelevant. Delayed gratification requires immense strength, but the results are undeniable. When the time is right, your actual success will serve as the ultimate truth, completely shattering the false narratives they built around you. You owe no one an explanation for how you choose to survive and thrive. Let your results speak so loudly that your detractors are left entirely speechless. If you are ready to stop arguing with those who misunderstand you and start building your own quiet empire, share your commitment in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering insights.